Rick is an F-rank adventurer who was beaten by everyone until he trained with S-rank adventurers, unlocking his secret powers that made him clap everyone. It starts with him lying in the dirt, bloody, bruised, and convinced that death is looming over him. But just when you think the curtain's closing, we find out he's not dying. He's training. Brutal, soul-crushing training under merciless masters who finally decide he's ready to face the adventurer's exam. Rick doesn't even get a moment of relief before we're whisked into the Adventurers Guild, where the annual rank exams are underway. Fresh-faced rookies line up to prove their worth, most of them barely out of their teens. Then there's Rick, pushing into his 30s, standing awkwardly in line like the one uncle who showed up to perform at a kid's talent show. At the counter is Elisa, the receptionist guiding candidates through registration. But when Rick steps forward, she freezes. She knows this man. They used to work side by side at this very guild until he quit 2 years ago to chase the insane dream of becoming an adventurer. Naturally, she wonders where he's been all this time, and Rick, humble as ever, admits he's been training in the mountains. Just as their awkward reunion begins to thaw, a drunk barges in, harassing Elisa with sleazy bravado. Rick tries to hold the man back, but in one gentle tug, the drunk throws up and collapses in a heap. Rick thinks the guy just overdid it with the booze, but whispers start spreading fast. That drunk wasn't a nobody. He was a former A-ranked adventurer clad in high-grade armor, and Rick's handprint is stamped into the breastplate like an autograph. Our hopeless newbie might not be so hopeless after all. The tests begin, and Rick's nerves climb higher. Candidates whisper as they see his age 32. For most adventurers, that's retirement age. To start at F rank now? Laughable. The first test is a mana assessment. Each examinee presses their hand against a glowing crystal ball, which measures magical capacity. Young recruits step up and get average but respectable readings. Then Rick takes his turn. The ball sputters, the worst possible result, F-. The others quietly laugh at him. They had never seen anyone with such a low rating. Rick shrinks under the humiliation, and then the crystal shatters to pieces the moment he walks away. No one, not even the examiners, can explain what just happened. Next up, offensive capability. The test is simple. Hit a slime bag with everything you've got. Candidates step forward one by one, but Rick's mind drifts back to the nightmare training he endured under his master, Brodston Ashort. The man once told him that weapons or magic were useless without physical strength, and set him an impossible task: punch golden slime bags until they break. For context, golden slimes are as hard as dragon fangs, and Brodston casually revealed he could break 200 of them at once. Rick, meanwhile, was forced to punch 50,000 times a day. Back in the present, the first star of the show is Freed, an 11-year-old boy with the talent of a prodigy. He unleashes a compact flame attack that looks small but crackles with terrifying power. Judges are dazzled, whispering about genius. Rick, on the other hand, is also in awe. Compared to the hellfire of his senpai's training, Freed's flames look like a candle at a birthday party. Then it's Rick's turn. One examiner scoffs, telling him to quit now. Too old, too weak, too late. But Rick ignores him, tightens his fist, and slams the slime bag. The result? A violent explosion that not only obliterates the bag, but punches straight through the wall, spraying slime everywhere. The examinees are drenched, the judges gape, and Freed's eye twitches. His spotlight just got stolen by a 32-year-old rookie. The defense test follows. Freed is smug again, ready to shine with his specialty, but Rick once more steals the thunder. He blocks the examiner's 4th-level spell like it's a warm summer breeze. The examiner frowns and ups the ante, preparing a 5th-level cyclone that would flatten entire squads. Even the protective barriers can't withstand the sheer power of the spell, shattering in a storm of magic. And when the dust clears, Rick stands unharmed, barely ruffled. Signs of this miracle reaches Sylvester Elcernia, a top-class royal knight, who rushes over after sensing the shockwaves. When he learns the man who withstood a 5th-level spell is a former receptionist now trying to pass his F-rank exam, even Sylvester is left in disbelief. The ordeal isn't over. Written exams follow, and while others sweat bullets, Rick calmly assures Rionette Elfelt, an elf senior he meets afterward, that he'll ace it with a perfect score. He admits, though, that he isn't so sure about the practical results. Rionette comforts him, reminding him of how far he's come in just 2 years. That peace doesn't last. Freed storms up, furious that Rick keeps stealing his stage. Rick tries to soothe him but can't even remember his name until Freed shrieks it, "Freed Dermu it!" The boy's anger boils over, and that's when his sister Angelica arrives. Unlike her brother, Angelica isn't just talented, she's a second-class royal knight. She hurls her glove at Rick, demanding a duel for humiliating her little brother. Rick, ever the oblivious man, picks up the glove and jokes about laundry, only to have Rionette explain the harsh truth. Picking it up means accepting the duel. The stakes? The loser serves the victor for life. Rick immediately panics. Facing a royal knight is suicide. Angelica alone can hunt monsters that would wipe out parties of veterans. But Rionette steadies him, reminding him that he's part of the Orichalcum Fist, the strongest party on the continent. He clings to her words as they step into the arena. Angelica promises to hold back, charging her body with mana and dashing forward at lightning speed, yet Rick dodges easily. She blinks, confused. Only first-class knights can keep up with her blink step. Convinced it was a fluke, she attacks again, but Rick still finds her speed sluggish, almost disappointing compared to what he endured in training. Just as he grows confident, Angelica stumbles on a rock. The stumble propels her body into a wild spin, nearly crushing Rick had he not dodged the rapid barrage of unintentional blows. He realizes her speed isn't a joke. One hit could kill him. Pretending the trip was intentional, Angelica unveils her flickering feet, a devastating speed technique she can only use 3 times a day. She lunges again, but Rick sighs. It still feels slow. Preparing to counter, he braces himself until she trips again. This time, her momentum hurtles her forward like a meteor. Rick panics and slams the ground, unleashing a shockwave that carves a crater in the arena. Angelica falls cold, realizing she would have been obliterated if that strike had landed. She asks who he really is. Rick shrugs. Just a former receptionist chasing a dream. That humility seals the duel. Angelica surrenders, praising him for surviving her flickering feet, and then sprints away before Rick can remind her of the deal. After all, she promised the loser would serve the victor forever, and she has no interest in ironing Rick's socks. Rick blinks in confusion, wondering if that really counted as a win. Rionette tells him the exam results will be out soon. Rick tries to relax, but the mention of his master Brodston and the rest of his terrifying party coming to check on him makes his stomach churn. Something tells him the hardest part of this exam isn't over, it's only just beginning. The morning after the chaos of the exam, tension fills the guild hall as the candidates wait for their results. Elisa, calm and professional as always, explains how it works. The judges will transmit magical energy into each participant's admission card. If the card glows red, it's game over, fail. Better luck next year. But if it glows blue, congratulations, you've made it through to the next stage. Simple system, though for the nervous rookies it feels like waiting for a death sentence. Rick is no exception. Even after everything he pulled off in the first round, he can't shake the nerves. Rionette notices his fidgeting and tells him not to worry and to have more confidence in himself. If he survived being tortured by his monstrous masters, this should be nothing. Her pep talk does help a little until she casually drops the bomb that if he fails, his seniors will simply triple his training. Suddenly, Rick isn't just nervous, he's terrified. When mana finally pours into his card, the glow flickers between red and blue, like it's mocking him, dangling failure right in front of his face. His stomach sinks, sweat drips, but at last the glow steadies into blue. Relief floods him, and Rick manages to smile as he leaves the hall alongside Rionette. But peace never lasts long in Rick's life. He suddenly catches a sharp, overwhelming scent, like someone drowned themselves in perfume. Enter Raster, a boy with the smug grin of someone who's never been told no in his life. He strolls up to Rionette, introducing himself as the eldest son of the House of Dermois, ruler of the Northern Lands, and without hesitation starts flirting. He even says he'd like to make her his second wife, like it's the most natural pickup line in the world. Rick naturally steps in, but Raster dismisses him with a sneer, calling him a middle-aged bore. Rick shortly fires back by claiming Rionette is his girlfriend, which makes Raster burst into laughter. A 32-year-old F-rank newbie dating a beautiful elf? Impossible. To make matters worse, Raster reveals he's not just some spoiled noble, he's an A-rank adventurer. He brags about reaching E rank at the age of 14 and with a cocky grin announces that he's also the examiner for the second stage of the exam. Then, as if that wasn't enough, he turns right back to Rionette, inviting her to dinner. She rejects him flat out, calling him out for reeking of perfume and proudly reaffirming that she's with Rick. Raster's smile fades, replaced by a scowl. If Rick wants to play rival, then so be it. He'll make sure the old man suffers in the next test. Things only get worse when Fried and Angelica show up, practically clinging to Raster. They're his younger siblings. They start whining about how a 40-year-old made fun of them and how he almost subjected Angelica to be his slave. Raster figures they are referring to Rick. Fantastic. Rick isn't just dealing with bratty prodigies anymore, he's about to be crushed by the combined pettiness of an entire noble family. At the exam center, the next test will be a mock battle. Rionette quietly advises Rick to hold back, but Rick knows that if Raster's the one overseeing the test, there won't be any holding back. He'll have to go all in just to survive. That's when a friendly man approaches, Lynx Larot, Rick's assigned examiner. Relief washes over him as Lynx introduces himself, explaining that he too started late in life. It took him 20 years to reach B rank, but he made it, and he respects Rick for chasing his dream despite the odds. For the first time, Rick feels like someone understands him. They shake hands and part ways, and Lynx instantly realizes this man's grip isn't just strong, it's forged from relentless training. This rookie is no joke. But then Raster, who had been listening in on their conversation, barges in, grinning like a fox. He tells Rick they need to talk, and before long, the candidates are hit with shocking news. Lynx has suddenly fallen ill, which means Raster will be stepping in as their examiner. Whispers ripple through the crowd. Raster isn't just an A rank, he's infamous. They call him the man of 1,000 spells, and more terrifyingly, the F rank crusher. Rick's stomach drops. Facing Raster head-on feels like suicide. He even considers running for it, but he knows if he bails, his seniors will triple his training. That's a fate worse than death. Thankfully, Rionette sees his panic and reassures him, telling him she believes in him. Before the battle begins, a hooded child sidles up to Rick, claiming he can read his future. He sets out a crystal ball and invites Rick to sit. Rick, gullible as ever, is about to comply when Rionette notices something off. There's a spell on the chair, but before she can stop him, Rick sits and in a flash he vanishes. Rionette's fury ignites. She smashes the crystal ball and exposes the mystic for who he really is. Fried, grabbing him by the collar, she threatens to destroy his eyes unless he explains where Rick went. Terrified, Fried blurts out that he teleported Rick about 100 meters away, near the beach. Meanwhile, Rick finds himself surrounded by men in black suits, each armed and radiating strength. Their leader calmly explains their mission: to eliminate him. And these aren't amateurs, they're all above B rank. Rick realizes instantly that this is the Dermuit's trap. Outnumbered and outclassed, he braces himself until three familiar figures arrive. His seniors. The legendary Orichalcum Fist. Brodston, Mazette, and Alice descend like storm gods, demanding to know what's happening. Rick, desperate to prevent bloodshed, tries to protect the assassins by pretending they're just helping him warm up before the exam. He even warns them to run while they still can. But the assassins laugh off his warning until one of them charges Brodston. The man's blade shatters on contact with Brodston's skin. In a single casual motion, Brodston crushes the attacker's fist, then heals it, telling him to keep practicing. That's right, Rick's support mage. Master is so broken he heals enemies after breaking them just to give them a second chance. Then Mazette steps in. Calm, almost bored, he pulls out a weapon of his own design, an assault rifle infused with magic. With a squeeze of the trigger, he unleashes a barrage of magical bullets, blasting enemies back like ragdolls. The assassins panic, but it only gets worse. One manages to seize Alice as a hostage, holding a blade to her throat and demanding the others surrender. Rick pleads with him to let her go, warning that he has no idea what he's messing with. The man ignores him and tightens his grip. Alice's eyes glow, her fury boiling over. With a single gesture, she unleashes a devastating 7th level spell, obliterating the surrounding enemies in a blinding explosion. The survivors freeze as recognition dawns. This isn't just some party. They realize they've picked a fight with legends: Alice, the most powerful genius vampire mage in the world; Mazette, the half-elf, half-vampire master craftsman of weapons of mass destruction; and Brodston, the unrivaled master of all support magic. Together, they are Orichalcum Fist, the strongest party on the continent. The assassins never stood a chance. Alice casually wipes out the last of them while Rick, mortified, runs back toward the exam hall to find Rionette. When he finally reaches her, she tosses Fried aside, having held him captive until Rick's safe return. But relief is short-lived. Link suddenly staggers into view, battered and bloodied. He reveals the truth. Raster forced him to step down as examiner and locked him away. Concerned, he urges Rick to leave the exam, warning that staying will put his life in danger. But Rick, stubborn as ever, refuses to run. He squares his shoulders, ready to confront Raster head-on. Elsewhere, one of Raster's henchmen delivers bad news. They fail to stop Rick. Raster's eyes light up with twisted excitement. Far from discouraged, he can't wait. Crushing this so-called old man rookie is going to be his greatest pleasure yet. Raster had made the training arena his personal stage, and unfortunately for the other trainees, that meant becoming his victims. Flames blazed across the arena as he knocked down challenger after challenger, his grin widening each time someone collapsed. Watching from the side was a man named Adolf, a peculiar spectator with an ability that let him see the very core stats of others: strength, body control, mana capacity, and magic control. It was a gift that came with a painful price, as he is quickly reminded when he lays eyes on Raster's numbers. Raster's mana reserves were so absurdly high that merely staring at them made Adolf's head throb. One unlucky trainee with average stats stepped up and was swiftly fried by Raster's lightning spells, collapsing before he even had the chance to look impressive. After Adolf's pain was relieved, his attention was drawn to a new arrival, Rick. Curious, he peeked at Rick's stats, only to reel back in shock. Every category except mana reserves was maxed out: strength, dexterity, magic control, perfection across the board. Adolf's gift betrayed him here. The sheer force of Rick's abilities sent a surge of pain crashing through his skull until he was literally writhing on the ground from just looking at him. Elsewhere in the arena, Elisa crossed paths with Rionette. The young woman introduced herself as Rick's former co-worker, which earned her a friendly invitation to sit with Rionette and her group. Watching Rick from the stands, Bruston asked Rionette what she thought of him, and she confidently remarked that Rick would breeze through the exam. Elisa wasn't convinced. Raster, after all, was notorious for humiliating F-rankers with his overwhelming magic, and Rick's low mana reserves painted a worrying picture. When Raster finally faced Rick, he actually praised him for escaping his guards earlier, though the compliment was laced with arrogance. He warned Rick not to get cocky and casually explained why he'd become an adventurer. Born a genius, climbing to A rank had been effortless, but it no longer entertained him. Fame, prestige, recognition. He had it all, and now he was simply bored. Rick couldn't help but wonder why someone like that even bothered to continue, promising that he won't lose to someone like Raster. Meanwhile, Freed, in bandages, and Angelica are cheering Raster on. The mock battle began, and Raster wasted no time launching a freezing blast of ice toward Rick. To everyone's surprise, Rick didn't budge. Raster smirked, assuming his opponent was paralyzed with fear, but the truth was far more calculated. Rick remembered Rionette's advice. Stay calm during the first minute, don't rush in, and observe completely before making a move. So he stood firm, eyes sharp, silently studying Raster's every movement. The next strike was far flashier. Raster unleashed a massive explosion of magic that rocked the arena. Dust and smoke filled the air, but as it cleared, Rick stood there without a single scratch. Elisa's eyes widened in shock, and Bruston calmly explained why. Magic reserves, he said, had to be nurtured before the age of 20. Rick only started his journey at 30, meaning his mana was naturally lacking. Instead, his body had been honed through brutal physical training, sprinting through snake-infested forests with 100 kilograms strapped to his ankles. Basically, if he wasn't dodging death, he was building muscle. Raster fired spell after spell, but Rick remained unshaken, moving with quiet patience. Watching from the stands, Bruston revealed that Rick's mentors had been none other than Mizette for magic training and Rionette herself for dexterity. Elisa blinked in disbelief. She had always assumed Rionette was just a maid. Bruston continued, saying Rick's raw power rivaled that of an S-rank adventurer, though Rick himself seemed blissfully unaware of the scale of his own strength. Frustrated, Raster switched tactics. Earth magic erupted, trapping Rick and crushing soil, but with sheer strength he broke free. When Raster tried to throw hands, Rick coolly countered, blasting him backward. Each move told the same story. Raster was drowning in mana, yet his training was sloppy, his form wasteful. Rick, meanwhile, had studied him like a textbook and now blocked or countered with ease. Even Raster's flames fizzled out as Rick casually brushed them aside, and Mizette mentions to Elisa that Rick had used less than a fraction of energy compared to his opponent to counter his spell, stating that it's possible with precise magic control. That was the equivalent of holding back a hurricane with a paper fan. Growing irritated, Raster darted in with his flickering feet technique, a rapid movement spell meant to overwhelm, but Rick had read his move and Raster only managed to react fast enough to cover himself in metal to tank the counterattack. Even when Raster admitted Rick was skilled above an E ranker, he tried to belittle him by claiming he wasn't fighting seriously, blaming fatigue from crushing earlier examinees. He asks Rick how, at his age, did he get so strong in just 2 years. That little jab struck a nerve. Rick's expression hardened as he recalled the agonizing training that had nearly killed him. His strength wasn't luck. It was forged through blood, sweat, and literal resurrections. Mizette explained to Elisa that Rick had in fact perished multiple times during training, only for Brewston to revive him again and again, a feat only possible if he uses his resurrection immediately after the person's demise. It was only his refusal to give up that had allowed him to surpass his own physical limits. Raster sneered at the notion, calling it lies, mocking the sheer insanity of putting oneself through such torture. But Rick's reason was simple. He sought to defeat the Kaiser Alcipiat, the strongest monster in existence etched into the legend of Yamato the hero. That goal, Broston revealed, was the ultimate mission of their party. Raster laps it off, declaring the monster nothing more than a myth. With a roar, he binds Rick once more in earthen roots and summons a towering tree golem, its wooden limbs ready to crush. The audience watches on as Rick remains pinned, the Dermowitz cheering on for Raster. Then, with calm precision, Rick charges up a single airshot spell, basic but sharpened to perfection, revealing that he has practiced this one technique over 100 million times, a number so ridiculous that Elisa balked. But Brewston explained it wasn't exaggeration. With time and space magic, Rick had condensed centuries of practice into years. Raster goes in for the kill, and Rick meets the attack head-on with his airshot spell. Rick's spell shatters the golem's spell, tears through the golem, and sends Raster flying into the stands, smashing into the benches and falling unconscious. The crowd is in disbelief. The invincible examiner had been beaten by an F rank. Rick reunited with his companions, who congratulated him warmly, and he humbly thanked them for their guidance. But peace didn't last long. Raster returned, flanked by his siblings still simmering with frustration. Rick advised him almost casually to focus on perfecting one skill. Raster bristled, taking it as mockery, and vowed to be his examiner again during the promotion exam, swearing that next time he would crush him. His siblings led him away, though Angelica paused, bowing politely to Rick, leaving him confused by the gesture. Finally, Rick and Rionette waited for the results to be announced. As names were read out, Rick's composure was unshaken. Rionette notes how calm he seems compared to his nerves during the test itself. Rick responds, saying he had just remembered a few things, though what that was he left unsaid, keeping everyone guessing. Rick reminisces on his days as a boy. He used to be entranced by the tale of Yamato the hero, the man who set his sights on slaying the dreaded Kaiser Alcipiat to claim a treasure said to grant any wish. Yamato never achieved that dream, but the sheer audacity of it lit a fire in young Rick's heart. He ran to his parents brimming with excitement, telling them that he too wanted to become an adventurer. Instead of encouragement, he was met with the cold splash of reality. His father dismissed Yamato's legend as nothing more than a bedtime story, while his mother wrung her hands over the dangers of adventuring, insisting he choose something safe, something stable. A desk job, maybe accounting, basically anything but monster slaying. For a child who just wanted to wield a sword and chase dreams, that was crushing, but hope came in an unexpected form. A doctor revealed to Rick that he was born with a rare, dormant skill, something extraordinary that just hadn't activated yet. The same kind of skill Yamato once possessed. Rick was ecstatic. It felt like destiny itself was telling him he had the potential to be great. The only problem? The doctor explained that this skill couldn't be trained or forced out. It would awaken on its own when the time was right. So Rick waited. Days turned into years, and still nothing. His friends tried to reassure him, telling him he didn't need some flashy skill to become an adventurer. Plenty of ordinary people made money doing it. But for Rick, it was never about the paychecks. He wanted to live a story worth telling. He wanted to chase Yamato's dream. Yet as more time passed, his patience broke. He gave up waiting for that elusive skill and resigned himself to a different path. He became a receptionist at the Tiger Road Guild, a job that thrilled his parents but left him feeling hollow. He smiled at the desk, shuffled papers, and kept trying to secretly activate that skill, but no matter what he did, nothing ever worked. Eventually, he packed away the old book about Yamato, burying the dream with it. Life trudged on. He worked alongside Elisa, settling into the dull rhythm of routine, until one day he casually mentioned to her that monsters had been appearing in town. A big quest was probably coming. Right then, his old friend Zaid walked through the doors with good news. He'd been promoted to B-rank adventurer. Rick congratulated him warmly, though inside he felt the sting of jealousy. That night, drowning his frustration in alcohol, he stumbled into regret, wondering why he'd ever abandoned his dream. But fate had a twisted sense of timing. Amidst his drunken haze, screams cut through the night as a monstrous beast appeared before him. Rick, fueled by some blend of fear, adrenaline, and maybe a little liquor courage, stepped forward to shield a woman in its path. He had no idea she was stronger than he could possibly imagine. With calm poise, she asked him to step aside, then proceeded to slice the monster into neat little pieces as if she were carving a holiday roast. Rick stood stunned. The woman introduced herself as Rionette, and when she revealed she was an S-rank adventurer, his jaw nearly hit the floor. The awe in his voice was impossible to hide as he confessed his dream of becoming an adventurer and asked her, hesitantly, if it was too late for him to try. After all, he was already in his 30s. Rionette admired his bravery in facing the monster, but she didn't sugarcoat the truth. At his age, his mana capacity was fixed. The window for growth had closed. It stung, but Rick swallowed his disappointment behind a smile and, on a whim, invited her to dinner. To his shock, she agreed. For a man used to rejection from monsters and his parents, this was practically a miracle. Rick floated on that high the entire next day, but when evening came, fate threw another wrench at him. Before he could make it to dinner, monsters flooded the city. Rionette urged him to leave it to her, and with a single swing she wiped out the horde in an instant. Rick could only marvel until she froze, trembling. The presence of a dragon had triggered traumatic memories, her power spiraling out of control. Zaid and several adventurers from the guild arrived to pick up the slack, but then the true threat descended, a massive dragon that dwarfed everything they'd faced. Panic swept through the group as they realized why monsters had been pouring into town. They were fleeing this beast. One brave soul hurled a spell at the dragon, only for it to shrug off the attack like it was a mosquito bite. Zaid quickly realized they stood no chance. He shouted for everyone to retreat, but the dragon unleashed a barrier, trapping them like prey in a cage. In that moment, Rick's body shook with fear, but he stepped forward anyway. If death was inevitable, then he wanted to die as an adventurer, not as a guild clerk. His defiance sparked something in the others, and they rallied beside him. Together they launched a desperate counterattack, but the dragon swatted away their efforts with terrifying ease. Fire spewed from its maw, engulfing the battlefield. Zaid, thinking quickly, transformed their bodies into iron to shield them from the flames, but the sheer force of the blast still sent them sprawling. Rick emerged from the wreckage, battered but unbroken. With trembling hands, he stood once more, refusing to yield. The dragon pinned him beneath its massive foot, and everyone assumed the end had come. Instead, that crushing weight became the key. At last, his dormant skill awakened. Mana surged through him in a torrent, overflowing until it seemed impossible his body could contain it. With a roar of triumph, he pushed back against the dragon's foot, lifting it with one hand. The astonishment on his face was pure joy. After years of waiting, his power was finally real. The dragon unleashed fire again, but Rick blocked it. Then it increased the intensity, but Rick deflected it, sending the blast right back at the beast. The impossible happened. The dragon fell. The crowd stood frozen, staring at the man they thought was nothing more than an aging desk jockey, now toppling a nightmare. The price, however, was steep. Rick collapsed unconscious from the overwhelming strain. When he awoke a week later, his body was racked with pain. Rionette was at his side, explaining grimly that every magic circuit in his body had been destroyed. He was, by all accounts, supposed to be dead. But she saw something in him others had missed: his will to fight, his refusal to ever give up. She invited him to join the Orichalcum Fist, the party dedicated to the same impossible dream as him, defeating the Kaiser Alcipiade. Her words pierced deeper than any dragon's claw. She told him that despite his age, he could still grow, still fight, still chase his dream. For the first time in his life, someone was telling him not to give up. Tears streamed down his face as he realized this was the moment his dream truly came alive. Back in the present, Rionette stood proudly beside him, congratulating him for passing the test and officially becoming an adventurer. Rick raised his fist high, his voice firm with conviction as he declared his new path. He was no longer a man behind a desk, he was an adventurer at last. Lynx's time in the hospital is almost up, and with his release just around the corner, he already has plans. He tells Rick that once he's out, they're going to share a drink together, and he's eager to meet Rick's friends. With that in mind, Link soon finds himself trudging into the mountains, confused as to why Rick insisted he wear his best armor just for a friendly meetup. The confusion only grows when he reaches his destination. Before him looms a massive fortress, Whighale Castle. Link stares in disbelief, wondering if he somehow took a wrong turn and wandered into the Demon Lord's lair. But when Rick greets him at the door, all apologies and smiles, it only makes things stranger. No monsters, no danger, just this castle. So why the full set of armor? Rick, with alarming nonchalance, explains that it's simply to prevent him from dying. A perfectly reasonable explanation, obviously. Inside, Reinette welcomes Link, and he's instantly charmed by her presence, already imagining his daughter growing up to be as strong and radiant one day. But his fatherly admiration doesn't last long, because little Alice suddenly decides to spice things up by firing a bolt of lightning straight at him. Link's life flashes before his eyes, only for Rick to leap in and deflect the blast, straight through the wall. While Rick scolds her for throwing around spells indoors, Alice insists she just wanted to play. Link is left reeling, unable to process. That play in this castle means unleashing city-leveling attacks. Reinette, unfazed, reminds Alice that the repair costs will be deducted from her food budget, prompting a quick and sheepish apology. Still, Rick knows that unless he entertains her, she'll just try again, so he agrees to spend time with the little lightning menace. Meanwhile, Reinette shows Link to his room, where he notices Miz tinkering outside with a strange contraption. His curiosity draws him closer, and Miz happily lets him test the invention, a rocket launcher. Link fires and watches in shock as the weapon unleashes destruction, immediately realizing that mass-producing such a thing would completely revolutionize warfare. As if the castle wasn't strange enough already, his wandering then leads him to Brewston, surrounded by shelves upon shelves of books. The massive library leaves Link impressed, and Brewston explains that this is his private collection. He feels most at peace when surrounded by knowledge, and with his calm wisdom, Link begins to suspect the man is more important to the party than he looks. When asked if he's read all of them, Brewston modestly admits that he's read most, but he's been busy training Rick. Inspired, Link asks if he too can learn from him. Brewston, spotting the same determination in Link's eyes that he once saw in Rick, agrees. But as soon as Rick hears about Link and Brewston heading into the forest, he panics. With good reason too, because Brewston's lessons turn out to be less than safe. Before long, Link finds himself tied with heavy weights and accidentally plummeting off a cliff. Just as he's sure this is the end, fate decides otherwise. He lands safely on the corpse of a beast Reinette had just slain for dinner. She saves him again, but before he can catch his breath, Brewston drags him right back for more training. Later, a thoroughly battered Link complains to Rick that he thought this would be a light workout. Rick can only shake his head, warning him never to believe Brewston or really any of the others when they say things like that. Brewston, completely serious, counters that Link had nothing to worry about anyway. If he'd died, they could have just revived him. A comforting thought in the most terrifying way possible. Even Alice demands to play with Link, but Rick shuts that down instantly, insisting the poor man would turn to ashes. Mizette, watching this unfold, bluntly blames Rick for inviting him here in the first place. Later that day, Reinette serves Link and Rick tea, and in the calm that follows, Link gets a little cheeky, asking Rick how far things have gone between him and Reinette. Rick, flustered, insists they don't have that kind of relationship. He's in his 30s after all, and convinced there's no chance. But Link just laughs, revealing that he and his wife are 20 years apart in age. To him, age is just a number, it's timing and feelings that matter. Rick, stunned, begins to reconsider. Later that night, during dinner, Link teases Rick again, telling him to use this opportunity to help Reinette with chores and grow closer to her. When he leaves to lend her a hand, Link seizes the moment to ask about Rick's mysterious power. Brewston explains that Rick's special skill only activates under unique conditions, so he has no control over it. Even so, Rick is already as strong as an S-rank adventurer. If his skill activates, he could surpass them all. He then reveals their ultimate mission to defeat Kaiser Alcipiade. To do that, they must gather 6 magic stones that open the door to the Source Spiral, where the Kaiser resides. These jewels only activate every 200 years, and the time is nearly upon them. Hearing this, Link decides he'll investigate further in the confidential archives. Rick, however, is far more concerned with something else: how to impress Reinette. He admits to Link that she's so talented at everything he can't even find a way to help her. Link bursts out laughing, thoroughly amused at his struggles. The next day, Rick, Brufston, and Alice head to the guild to take on a quest. But there's a catch. They need a party of 4 with at least 2 A-rank members. The guildmaster introduces Ray, a young adventurer eager to take on dangerous missions. She gladly joins and they set off on the mission, though when Rick mentions they're searching for a magic stone, she immediately wonders how much it could sell for. Rick warns her that handling it carelessly will attract monsters, but she brushes it off, boasting that she can handle anything. Curious about him, she asks Rick's rank and bursts out laughing when he admits he's only E rank. She assumes he just started late and internally reaffirms that she has no intention of ending up like him. Back at the castle, Rionette worries for their safety, but Ms. dismisses her concern, pointing out that Bruston is with them. Instead, he spends his time testing his latest invention, one that pumps air into skirts to, well, you can guess. Unfortunately for him, Rionette catches on quickly and obliterates his contraption before he can get his results. Meanwhile, out on the quest, Ray finally witnesses what Rick's companions are truly capable of. When a wyvern swoops at them, Brewston casually punches it aside, leaving her stunned. She panics, worried that sparing it will bring reinforcements, but Brewston calmly explains that's exactly what he wanted and tells Rick to take her away for her safety. Sure enough, more wyverns arrive, only for Alice and Brewston to wipe them out effortlessly. Ray, overwhelmed, barely processes the chaos when a massive red wyvern suddenly appears. Terrified, she insists even A-rank adventurers struggle against such beasts, urging Rick to run. But Rick, calm and determined, tells her he has to test something and steps forward. When Ray chooses to fight beside him, she prepares a spell, only to watch in shock as Rick casually throws a punch that blows the creature's head clean off. So much for struggling. The next day, Ray reports back to the guildmaster describing how Rick and his companions even hauled back a wyvern corpse for dinner. He had hoped the ordeal would make her more cautious, but instead she's more fired up than ever to grow stronger. As for Rick and his group, their mission proves successful. They uncover one of the magic jewels deep within the wyvern's lair. With Miz's magic, the stone reveals a map pointing to the next location, Heractopia, the city famous for its grand Colosseum. 400 years ago, a man named Alexander Heractopia carved his legend into history with nothing but his fists. The fourth king of Knuckle Percy built a massive Colosseum, gathered challengers from across the continent, and proceeded to reign as champion with a casual winning streak of more than 10,000 matches. At that point, you think people would stop lining up to fight him, but apparently everyone was just too stubborn or too hopeful that he might finally lose. Spoiler, he didn't. That Colosseum became the beating heart of a kingdom, and so Heractopia was born. Current day, Rick and the gang arrive at the city, greeted by Alexander's towering statue. Brewston stares up at it with sparkling eyes, wishing he could go a few rounds with the legendary king. Rick, meanwhile, quickly imagines the entire country being reduced to rubble if that fight ever happened. Here, fighting isn't just a pastime, it's the #1 profession. Fighters are called pugilists, and everyone lives and breathes combat. Perfect place to go. Jewel hunting, right? They try to ask around about the 6 magical jewels, but the second people get a good look at them, they scatter like pigeons chased off a fountain. Rick suggests heading for the town hall instead, but fate interrupts when they spot a girl, Militia, being harassed in the street. Before Rick can step in, Brewston looms over the man with his usual terrifying aura. Normally that would send anyone packing, but this guy refuses to budge and boldly declares himself a fighter. That's adorable. Brewston thinks he looks as threatening as a wet napkin. Still, the man insists, so they head into an alley and 5 seconds later he's face down in the dirt. After brushing him off, Brewston flashes the jewel they already have and demands to know if the man has seen another like it. The man, who finally introduces himself as Gold, admits he and Militia have indeed seen one before. The problem is they can't quite remember where. Brewston presses them to try harder, but their conversation gets cut short by a parade announcement. The Grand King of Fists tournament is about to begin. All attention shifts to the reigning champion, Kelvin Erwolf, whose championship belt just so happens to have, of course, one of the magic jewels embedded in it. Rick nearly chokes when he sees it. Later, Kelvin visits his gym where an elderly man thanks him for showing up at the parade. Kelvin, polite as ever, doesn't mind. He believes it's part of a fighter's duty to keep people entertained. When asked about his condition, he shrugs that he's fine, though he wouldn't mind finding someone strong enough to give him a real challenge. Cue Rick and company arriving uninvited. The The old man mistakes them for fans, but before Rick can explain, Brewston demands the belt outright, claiming it belonged to an old party member. The old man is ready to throw them out on their backsides when Kelvin himself stops him. Surprisingly, Kelvin believes their story but calmly explains he still won't hand it over. The belt belongs to Heractopia, to its people. The only way to win it is through the tournament. Hearing that, Brewston just nods and leaves without another word, shocking Rick and Rionette with how quickly he agreed. The old man thinks Kelvin made a mistake, letting them walk away, but Kelvin isn't worried. If they had fought here, the gym would be reduced to rubble. Besides, he can already sense it. Brewston is the real deal and he's itching for that match. Back outside, Brewston lays down the plan. They're all entering the tournament. To qualify, they must survive preliminary leagues held in both the East and West districts of the city. Brewston claims the East for himself, leaving the West to Rick and Rionette. Rick worries about him going alone, but Brewston casually waves it off, saying he's hired Gold as his guide. With that settled, Rick moves on with Rionette to his own test for the qualifiers. The examiner informs him he'll have to participate in a mock battle. His opponent is someone who has already won every one of her qualifying matches. Before Rick can even wonder what kind of powerhouse that might be, Angelica suddenly appears. She's shocked too. Of all people, Rick is her opponent? He asks about her brother Raster, but she explains she's here on her own now, having become a fighter in her own right. Still, she knows the gap between them. Rick already crushed Raster after all. The match begins, and Angelica charges with full strength only to immediately trip and fall. She stubbornly gets back up, prepares another strike, and face plants again. Confused, she looks up to see Rick calmly explaining his new technique, basically sweeping her legs out from under her again and again until she admits defeat. It's cheap but effective. Angelica insists she won't surrender, throwing herself up again and again even as Rick keeps putting her back down like a relentless game of whack-a-mole. Her determination impresses him enough that he considers fighting her seriously, but just as he's about to unleash his power, she suddenly surrenders. Guess even pride has limits when your backside hits the floor too many times. Afterward, while Rick is walking back with Rionette, Angelica confronts him. She bursts into tears, calling him out for sabotaging her, and Rick, being Rick, takes her to Melicia's restaurant to calm her down. Over a warm meal, Angelica asks why he's even here in Heractopia. Rick admits he wants to enter the King of Fists tournament. Angelica explains the brutal requirement. To qualify, one needs 40 victories within 6 months. Rick, however, casually drops that they've already registered for 40 matches, all crammed into the next 4 days. Her jaw nearly hits the table, but hey, efficiency is key. Rick steps into his first official match against a fighter named Grit Albert. Rumors swirl that Grit cheats with hidden weapons, but a body check revealed nothing. As the fight begins though, Grit smirks and pulls an impact stone from the sole of his shoe, enhancing his punches. He lands a blow and celebrates too early. His hand shatters against Rick's face. Rick, unfazed, politely tells him to train harder if he wants to handle the stone's true power. Then, with a single missed punch, Rick releases a shockwave so strong it knocks Grit unconscious. The crowd gasps, the referee is left speechless, and an old man in the audience can only stare in awe at Rick's sheer power. Declared the victor, Rick leaves the ring without a scratch. And that's only the first of his 40 battles. The week is about to get very, very interesting in Heractopia. Angelica showed she wasn't just along for the ride when her match ended with a single kick that launched her poor opponent straight into the wall like a rag doll. With that, she secured her 40th victory, officially passing the qualifiers. Rick and Rionette congratulated her, but Angelica immediately reminded Rick of the catch. He could only fight once a day at any given venue. Sure, there were plenty of arenas across the country, but they were so spread apart it was nearly impossible to cover them all in time. His next fight was 30 kilometers away, and even a carriage wouldn't get him there fast enough. Rick, of course, brushed it off, declaring that he'd just run there. Angelica thought he was insane, but considering this was Rick, she probably should have seen it coming. Once he sprinted off, Rionette noticed Angelica's frustrated pout and slyly asked if she wanted to see his matches. Angelica admitted she did, but she doubted she could keep up with him. Rionette had other plans. Without warning, she grabbed Angelica and started leaping across rooftops to chase after Rick. Angelica screamed in terror while Rionette told her this was simply the fastest way, and that's how they covered all 40 matches, Rick sprinting from countryside to countryside and Rionette dragging Angelica's body along. By the end of 4 exhausting days, Angelica was left staring at Rick in disbelief. He had actually managed to win all 40 matches. She was grateful he wasn't in her block, though Rionette teasingly pointed out that Brofston was still competing too. After telling her who Brewston is, the realization only crushed Angelica further. She admitted she didn't stand a chance against either of them, and in her slump, she muttered that people might start to think Rionette and Rick were lovers since she followed him so loyally. Rionette didn't even flinch, casually admitting her feelings were real. Before Angelica could dwell on that bombshell, a desperate man came begging for help, dragging them off on yet another errand. Meanwhile, Rick found himself approached by a well-dressed person named Snape, the chairman of the committee managing the West League. Rick had no idea who he was, but Snape seemed to know about him, praising him as the fastest qualifier in league history. Their handshake, however, revealed more than Snape expected. Rick could tell instantly that the man had once been a trained fighter. A bit stunned, Snape admitted he'd won a small tournament 20 years ago before retiring at 23, never rising beyond that single victory. He added that his company would be sending a representative into the King of Fists tournament, and before leaving asked Rick to remind Angelica not to get too carried away. That alone made Rick suspicious. Later, at Melicia's restaurant, those suspicions grew sharper when she warned him about Snape. Despite his polished manners, there were ugly rumors tying him to the underworld. Worse, his company was sponsoring the tournament itself, meaning his participant slot could be used however he pleased. Across town, Angelica and Rionette had taken on some questionable work themselves. Dressed in bunny suits, they were hustling bets for the upcoming tournament. Angelica wasn't exactly thrilled, insisting this wasn't her choice. Rionette happily outed herself as the one who accepted the job, enjoying every second. A drunk staggered their way and started harassing the girls, but he picked the wrong bunny to mess with. Angelica flattened him instantly, earning stunned stares. Rick arrived just in time to catch this scene, and though Angelica's outfit left him shocked, his brain completely shut down when he saw Rionette in her bunny costume. That reaction left Angelica fuming. Over at the gym, Kelvin continued to prepare, while the old man watched in awe. Both Rick and Brewston had blown through their qualifiers in record time, and Kelvin could hardly contain his excitement at the thought of facing them. The old man realized he hadn't seen that gleam in Kelvin's eyes since the day he recruited him to Heractopia. The next day, Angelica at the inn. Angelica is still pissed, and when Rick asks if she's still furious about the way he reacted to her outfit compared to Rionette's, he tries smoothing things over by saying she looked cute too, but that doesn't convince her. She shifted gears when he mentioned meeting Snape, pretending not to know who he was, though her mood betrayed otherwise. Soon after, the league matches began. Angelica faced off against a girl named Helen, immediately rushing her. Helen dodged gracefully, countering with sharp punches, but Angelica blocked and pushed through, even if she seemed to be straining more than usual. Rionette mentions that Angelica isn't her usual self. With a final fierce kick, Angelica launches Helen into the wall, claiming the win. Rionette mentions that Angelica isn't her usual self. Both she and Rick continued advancing through their matches, but Angelica's block became a gauntlet. She had to win all 4 of her remaining fights to qualify for the main tournament. Her momentum came to a crashing halt when she met a fighter named Taylor. She struck him with lightning, stringing together her hit-and-run tactics with magic only to discover his defenses shrugged it off completely. His counterpunch sent her slamming into a wall, ending her run. Afterward, Rick gently pointed out that she had drained herself by clinging to techniques that clearly weren't working. Angelica refused to answer, brushing him off, but Rick pressed until she finally snapped. She reveals Snape was her fiancé. The story spilled out painfully. A year ago, her parents had died, leaving her and her siblings to support the family. They fell into crippling financial trouble until their grandfather struck a deal with Snape. He'd provide the money to save them, but only in exchange for Angelica's engagement. With no way out, she'd been stuck ever since. Rick was stunned, but Angelica grew frustrated, accusing him of not listening properly. Before the air could clear, trouble walked right into the street. A thug named Gaith shoved a woman aside, then brutalized Taylor with a chokeslam when he tried stepping in. When the thug started tearing at the woman's clothes, Angelica rushed to stop him, only to have him turn his rage on her. Rick stepped between them, ready to fight, but Snape suddenly appeared, ordering Gaith to hold back until the tournament. Shockingly, he revealed Gaith was his brother. The revelation soured everything. Rick immediately suspected Snape's involvement in the tournament was tied not just to his engagement with Angelica, but to fixing the outcome for profit. With so much money riding on the bets, sponsoring a fighter like Geith gave him all the leverage he needed. Angelica, realizing this, declared she would defeat Snape's fighter and end their engagement once and for all. But that meant facing Geith, a man she knew she couldn't beat. Rick, however, wasn't about to let her carry that burden alone. Calmly, he offered to train her himself. Training under Rick isn't exactly a fitness boot camp, it's a survival test. Angelica finds herself strapped with weights and literally tied to Rick as he sprints off, dragging her along like a reluctant kite. She's baffled at first, but Rick explains his cruel logic. If she trains with a fast runner, her body will adapt to faster movements. Angelica begs for a breather, but he casually drops that they'll rest in 6 hours. Forget cardio, this is cardio homicide. To Rick's surprise, she actually survives the day, collapsing in exhaustion but feeling proud. He even admits that when Rionette first put him through this torture, he passed out cold. Angelica's victory celebration is cut short though, when Rick cheerfully informs her this was just the warm-up. Imagine running a marathon and someone telling you, "Congrats, now the real race starts." By the 5th day, Angelica has had enough and ditches training, sneaking off to a cafe. She's convinced Rick won't find her, but he tracks her down in 15 minutes flat, like a bloodhound with GPS. Instead of scolding her though, he sympathizes. During his own training, he wanted to quit countless times. In fact, he did die several times, only for Brewston to revive him. The advice that kept him going was comparing short-term suffering to the regret of giving up. That memory fuels Angelica too, and she finally admits she's tired of being groomed as a noble lady. Fighting, not tea parties, is how she wants to contribute to her family. Rick acknowledges she's already a strong swordsman, but points out she shouldn't rely solely on weapons. Instead, she should learn techniques that make her body itself a weapon, fists like blades. For that, he brings in the ever-deadly Rionette as her new instructor. Nothing says, "Welcome to martial arts," like training with someone who casually breaks people. Angelica's first real test arrives against Silver Helgand, with the winner earning a spot in the big tournament. She's looking far from her best. With torn clothes from the training, expectations are low, but the fight lasts about as long as an awkward handshake. She charges in, kicks him once, and wins instantly. The poor guy probably didn't even process the loss before hitting the wall behind. The hilarious part is that Angelica, still stuck in training high, keeps attacking even after the referee calls it, as if Rick might pop out yelling, "Again!" Later, Alice and Miz return, but they admit the intel about the Empire's magic jewels was false. Brewston also shows up, and over a meal, Rick praises Angelica for her rapid progress. She worries the training time isn't enough, but Brewston reassures her, effort always leaves its mark, even in a short time. Inspiring words, especially from someone who casually revives people, like resetting a video game. Rionette, Miz, and Alice all encourage her too. The tournament finally begins. Angelica notices the brackets are set up so Geith, the spoiled noble, won't face Kelvin or Brewston until the finals. It reeks of manipulation. She also realizes Snape plans to make a fortune by having Geith throw a fight when the odds are stacked against him. Angelica decides to ruin their little scheme since she's scheduled to face Geith in round 2. Meanwhile, Kelvin's growth gets some backstory. The old man recalls when Kelvin first joined his gym, full of arrogant swagger. He demanded to fight their best man, only to get beaten down instantly. That first taste of defeat humbled him and sparked the training that eventually made him the 5th King champion. Nothing builds character like a healthy dose of humiliation. In the opening matches, Geith's strength shocks the audience. His opponent lands a flurry of punches that bounce off him harmlessly, before Geith casually ends it in one blow. The crowd is dazzled, but Rick notices something off. Despite Geith's power, his movements are clumsy, almost amateurish. Strong, yes. Skilled, not quite. Other fighters progress, with Rick and his companions advancing smoothly. The spotlight then shifts to Kelvin versus Eddie. Eddie attacks first, but Kelvin's counterpunch drops him like a sack of bricks. Rick notices Kelvin seems to predict Eddie's moves, and Brewston explains that Kelvin's sharp sense of smell lets him detect adrenaline spikes and even shifts in electrical signals. Basically, he's a human polygraph machine. At one point, Kelvin lets Eddie land a blow only to crush him in the follow-up, winning decisively. The next day brings Angelica's much-anticipated match against Geith. Before the fight, Snape casually joins Rick in the stands, explaining he needs to watch closely. After all, the fight is between his brother and his fiancée. Rick isn't sure what's stranger, Snape sitting among regular spectators instead of VIPs, or the fact that he said that with a straight face. Down in the ring, Angelica confronts Gaith, determined to show the results of her training. Gaith mocks her, dismissing her efforts and bragging that he's never trained a day in his life. His strength just comes naturally. Angelica doubts him, pointing out his chiseled physique looks like a gym membership advertisement. Gaith smirks and offers to avoid hitting her stomach so she can still bear his brother's children. Yes, he's that guy, every story has one, and she vows to pulverize him. The bell rings and Angelica goes on the offensive, but her attacks bounce off him without effect. Smirking, Gaith assumes the match is already his, but then Angelica does something shocking. She cancels her strengthening magic. To him, it looks like she's handicapping herself, but in reality, she's making a point. This time when she strikes, her blow lands clean, drawing blood from the arrogant noble. For the first time, Gaith realizes this won't be as effortless as he imagined. The training, the stubborn willpower, the countless hours tied to Rick like a medieval workout accessory, it all culminates here. Angelica finally proves she's not just a noble pretending to fight, she's becoming a fighter who can stand on her own even against someone born with every advantage. And that's where the stage is set, a spoiled noble who's never worked for his strength, facing a determined woman who clawed her way up through pure grit and brutal training. The clash is only beginning, but already Gaith is bleeding. Gaith had always been a walking wall of arrogance, but when Snape saw Angelica slice into him with her blade, his jaw nearly hit the floor, not because she'd cut him. Oh no, the sharpest blade couldn't even scratch this guy's skin, but because Angelica had pulled off something far beyond her usual skill level. Rionette explained it with pride, almost like a proud older sister. Angelica had managed to twist a dangerous secret technique into her own version. It was called the Thread Slash, a move meant to channel energy through extreme body control. Angelica hadn't fully mastered it during training, but she'd secretly kept practicing on her own. And by mixing it with another move, magic flow, reverse reflection, she pulled off her own crazy spin on it. Ms., being the walking encyclopedia she is, filled in the details. The move was basically about stuffing mana inside the body and then blasting it out in one explosive burst. It's insanely taxing on the body, like trying to bench press a mountain for fun, but Angelica could handle it because she'd endured a month of brutal, hellish training. And now, with that training, she was actually pushing Gaith back. Gaith, of course, did not appreciate being made to look bad. His solution? Punch the ground so hard the entire arena filled with dust, like a toddler throwing a tantrum, except this toddler could cause earthquakes. Hidden in the dust, he tried to ambush Angelica, but she dodged. Then he tried again, this time sneaking behind her and slammed her straight into a wall. Angelica tried to recover with Blink Step, but to her horror, Gaith copied the move instantly after just watching her use it once. He sent her flying again. At this point, it was less of a fight and more like Gaith auditioning to be a baseball pitcher. Meanwhile, Snape quietly opened up to Rick. The first time he'd met Gaith was back when he himself wanted to become a fighter. Gaith had crushed him effortlessly, shattering not just his chances but also his confidence, and Snape quietly retired. Now, people whispered that Snape fixed matches, but in reality, he had bet everything on Gaith before the tournament even began, because no one thought a slot fighter could ever win. Back in the ring, Gaith insulted Angelica's parents and then proceeded to beat her into the ground. But she refused to quit, which only made him angrier. He decided he was done playing and was about to kill her outright until Rick, watching helplessly from the sidelines, threw a shoe at him. Yes, Rick literally lobbed his footwear into the arena, and somehow that small act distracted Gaith enough to miss his killing blow. Moral of the story, never underestimate the power of an airborne sneaker. After the match, Gaith approached Rick, furious, but Rick stood his ground and declared that he'd crush him in front of everyone. Rick's resolve wasn't just words either. He stepped up and won his own match shortly afterward. Elsewhere, Brewston demolished his opponent with a single punch, like a man swatting a mosquito, while Kelvin absorbed some hits before securing victory. With that, the final four of the tournament were locked in. The next day, Angelica was up and moving. Rick runs into her in a hallway and asks her to rest and not move about too much so she can heal properly. She apologized to Rick, her voice trembling. She cried that she had wasted his time, that maybe she should just accept Snape's proposal and give up on her dreams. Rick for once looked ashamed. He insisted that she had done everything she could, and if anyone was blind, it was him for failing to recognize how strong Geith really was. But he promised her this: she should watch the next match, because he'd show her what was possible, what she could achieve. When Rick and Geith finally stepped into the ring, Geith started things off by mocking Angelica again, apologizing for not killing her the day before. That was the last straw. Rick, already fuming, immediately socked him in the face, knocking him to his knees. Geith lashed back, but Rick dodged and countered with such precision that Geith spat blood. Angelica gasped from the sidelines, but Rionette quickly explained that Rick had used a through attack, a technique that damages the body from the inside. In other words, Geith's iron skin meant nothing against it. Geith responded by unleashing a strengthening magic unique to Dragonoids and barreling after Rick. Rick tries to run, but Geith caught him and slammed him to the ground. Still, Brewston noticed that Geith was burning through his mana at a dangerous rate. Snape pointed out the flaw. Geith never trained to build up his reserves. He was basically running on the mana he was born with. This annoyed Rick deeply, since he himself had struggled all his life with a lack of mana. Rick landed another through attack, but this time it didn't work. Geith had activated the Iron Body technique. Geith pounded him with blow after blow, and Snape muttered that the fight was over. But Brewston wasn't convinced. He said Rick didn't care about how the crowd saw the fight, he only cared about how Angelica saw it. Sure enough, while Geith went wild with attacks, Rick was absorbing the hits like a sponge. Rionette revealed why. Rick was using a body manipulation technique that dispersed impacts throughout his body. To Geith, it must have felt like trying to break a rock by punching a pillow. Realizing Rick wasn't even injured, Geith grew more frustrated. He noticed that Rick had been holding back, restraining himself to Angelica's level as if to show her what her future self could become. This only enraged him further. Covering his body in steel, Geith launched another attack. Rick responded with another through attack that shattered the steel armor like brittle glass. Exhausted, Geith's magic faltered, messy and sloppy, which makes breaking his defenses easy. Rick calmly explained the irony. Geith had never been tired before in his life, so now he had no idea how to fight while exhausted. Spectators began wondering if Rick might actually be a greater prodigy than Geith, but his companions dismissed it. To them, Rick wasn't talented at all. He was just someone who had worked harder than anyone else. Rick himself admitted as much. He told Geith that real prodigies polish their skills, and he knew this because he fought alongside true geniuses. Geith predictably snapped. His body warped and transformed as he revealed his trump card, his dragon form. The monster within came out, and Geith pounded Rick with monstrous strength. Rick fought back, realizing something crucial. At her current level, Angelica would never be able to defeat Geith, so he kicked things up a notch, increasing his speed and power until Angelica, watching from the sidelines, realized the truth. Rick wasn't just fighting Geith, he was showing her what she could become in a year's time if she didn't give up. Rick eventually brought Geith crashing to the ground, telling him the only way to win was through sheer willpower, something he'd been looking down on, but Geith refused. Rick sighed and decided to end things. Once again, Geith tried his dust cloud trick, filling the arena in a haze, but Rick countered with the very same technique Angelica had once used, and this time he struck Geith down for good. Still, Rick admitted he hadn't perfected it. If Rionette had done it, she would have sliced Geith clean in half. The crowd roared, Angelica watched in awe, and Rick stood tall as the winner. The tournament wasn't over, but one thing was clear: Rick wasn't just fighting to win, he was fighting to prove that hard work, grit, and maybe a flying shoe or two could topple even the strongest prodigy. Angelica thanks Rick, promising that she'll become an even stronger fighter. The crowd seems to agree with cheers as he's announced winner, because Rick gets a thunderous applause that makes it sound like the entire arena is ready to crown him their champion already. Even Snape, the eternally grumpy ex-fighter, admits he's surprised at the outcome, and yet, a part of him feels oddly satisfied. Geith was the one who crushed his own career in the ring, so seeing him lose now? It's almost cathartic. Of course, it also cost him a small fortune since he bet everything on Geith, but for once Snape admits losing feels good. He even sighs that it's a shame he can't marry Angelica. She suspects it's all about her noble status, but Snape confesses he genuinely liked her. The man might be broke, bitter, and full of bad life choices, but at least he's honest. But there's no time to dwell on failed romance because the next match is about to begin. The old man leans over to Kelvin, hyping him up and insisting that he's the strongest fighter, warning him not to hold back. His opponent, none other than the mountain of muscle, Brewston. The announcer introduces Kelvin with flair, calling him the reigning champion, and the crowd absolutely loses it. Rick notices how adored Kelvin is, practically treated like a celebrity. The fight begins with Kelvin rushing in, fists flying. He pummels Brewston with a barrage of attacks, but the giant doesn't even flinch. Instead, he casually counters with a single swing of his arm that generates a shockwave so powerful the audience gasps. Kelvin, grinning, calls him the strongest opponent he's ever faced. Just as the tension builds, the wall of the arena shatters and Geith storms back in, his dragon blood having gone berserk thanks to the Rick Organ transformation he went through. Tears into the audience like a wild beast. Snape instantly realizes the cause, but before Geith can cause more chaos, Kelvin steps in. Annoyed at the interruption, he meets the raging dragon head-on and knocks him out cold with a single devastating punch. One hit, that's all it takes. The crowd is stunned, and Rionette quietly remarks that Kelvin's power has already reached the level of an S-ranker. The match is postponed for the next day, though Kelvin sighs in disappointment since he was finally enjoying himself. Brewston, meanwhile, casually observes that he senses uncertainty in Kelvin's strikes. Later, Rick goes for a jog near the country's border, his version of cooldown after beating a dragon man. He notices a rock formation that reminds him of Rionette, but before he can drift into nostalgia, he spots Kelvin training nearby. Kelvin explains he wanted to be alone, but Rick showed up at the perfect time. Without warning, he launches a sudden attack, forcing Rick to fight back. Rick blocks and counters with a punch, impressed that Kelvin reacted so fast, but he can't help but wonder why Kelvin let himself be hit so easily in the tournament. That's when Kelvin explains his story. Growing up in the slums, fighting was his greatest joy, but eventually he outclassed everyone around him. Hungry for real battles, he came to Heractopia, where he crushed every opponent with a single punch. At first it was fun until it wasn't. The fights were too easy, too short, and the crowd grew bored. Kelvin overheard the old man talking with a business partner about how bad it was for the gym's image if every match ended in under a minute. Realizing he was the problem, Kelvin made a choice. He threw fights on purpose, letting opponents land blows and pretending to struggle, just to entertain the audience. From then on, he never fought at full strength again. With a wry grin, he admits he's never gone all out. Rick shakes his head. Tomorrow, Kelvin won't have that option. The next day, the arena is packed again, and the officials have installed defensive magic to protect the spectators, just in case. Kelvin squares off against Brewston once more. This time, Kelvin covers his arm with a vortex of wind, launching relentless strikes. Brewston absorbs it all with calm precision and forces him back, easily reading that Kelvin's still holding back. Kelvin admits it, he doesn't want the audience to see his true power. In response, Brewston casually says he'll fight with just 2 fingers and won't even move from his spot. Flex much? Kelvin charges, but Brewston grabs him mid-attack with 2 fingers and slams him into the ground. Kelvin escapes, but as the crowd cheers, he debates unleashing everything. Still, fear of exposure holds him back until the old man screams at him from the sidelines, calling him an idiot. The old man reveals his dream is to train the strongest fighter in the world, and he wants that fighter to be Kelvin. That's all it takes. Kelvin decides he's done pretending. He unleashes his true strength, attacking with ferocity. Brewston, grinning, now uses his full hand to defend himself, explaining he matches his guard to his opponent's level. Kelvin's kick lands but does nothing. Brewston hurls him across the arena, though Kelvin recovers midair with a steel body technique. Instead of despairing, he laughs. This is fun. The crowd, however, turns on him. Realizing he's been deceiving them all this time, they boo and jeer. Kelvin ignores them, casting high-level magic instead. A 5th-level fire spell explodes toward Brewston, only for Brewston to summon a massive stone wall and block it. Undeterred, Kelvin switches to a 7th-level nature spell, restraining him with vines, then immediately escalates into an 8th-level advanced magic. A meteor descends from the sky, enormous enough to blot out the sun. Angelica nearly faints. 8th-level spells are a rare sight. Rick panics too, realizing Kelvin's sheer talent rivals even the greatest adventurers. But Brewston? He simply punches the meteor into dust with his bare hands. Who needs magic when you're basically the Hulk in orc form? Brewston acknowledges Kelvin's conviction, and in orc culture, he shows it with a quarter thumbs up, a gesture declaring he'll drop all defense and go full offense. Rick recognizes the signal just as Brewston unleashes a blow with a shockwave so fast and powerful it sends Kelvin flying even though he dodged it. Kelvin can't even rely on his sharpened senses, the orc is simply too fast. Desperate, Kelvin throws everything he has left, cycling through spells and attacks, but none of them work. His mana drains dry. Brewston closes the gap and delivers a crushing blow, knocking Kelvin down hard. Kelvin lies there, body screaming in pain, realizing he has nothing left. For a moment he thinks of giving up, but then he remembers why he started. He always wanted to fight someone stronger. With sheer grit, he stands again, unleashing a final desperate barrage. Exhausted, trembling, he attacks with every ounce of strength and skill he has left. The crowd, moved by his determination, erupts in cheers. For the first time, Kelvin truly gives everything. And he does it. He lands a hit that actually forces Brewston to move. Just a step, but enough to prove his point. With a smile stretched across his face, Kelvin admits he's had the most fun of his life. That's when Brewston delivers the finishing blow, ending the fight cleanly. Kelvin collapses, battered, broken, but smiling to the end. Brewston is announced winner. Rick and Angelica hurry over to congratulate him as he leaves the arena. Rick, ever the practical one, half-joked that all he needed to do now was politely withdraw and hand over the magic jewel, and everything would be solved. But Brewston, with that unshakable grin, shut that dream down instantly. He said he was looking forward to fighting Rick next. The orc walked away, leaving Rick pale as a ghost and visibly trembling. Angelica could practically see his soul trying to flee his body. The man had just realized he was the final boss's next opponent, and the stress nearly broke him on the spot. Meanwhile, Kelvin sat hunched over a newspaper, the headlines screaming about his deception. The crowd's love had flipped overnight into pure hatred. He asked the old man if he was really fine with all this mess. But the old man, calm as ever, brushed it aside and instead wanted to talk about Kelvin's last move in the arena. Kelvin admitted he had no idea what he did. He'd simply been caught up in the thrill and acted on instinct. Now he felt like everything he had built was gone, questioning why his mentor hadn't abandoned him too. The old man's reply was firm. Kelvin still had a future, and to him, the boy was like a son. Before the conversation could get heavier, Brewston arrived. He checked in on Kelvin's injuries, even offering to heal him, but Kelvin refused. He said he wanted to experience the pain. Pain meant growth, and he wanted to remember this lesson. He tells Brewston he'd be watching the final with excitement. Back with Rick, well, let's just say the hero of this story had barricaded himself in his room like a kid refusing to go to school. Angelica knocked, tugged, and ordered him out, but Rick barked back that he didn't want to die. Snape even showed up to encourage him, appealing to reason, reminding him that thousands of people had worked hard to make this tournament happen, and countless fans were waiting for this final match. Rick's response? Yeah, well, they're not the ones about to be flattened by an orc. He was clinging to his life above all else. But Snape, instead of sympathy, broke into a dramatic little number, painting a picture of dreams crushed and workers' efforts wasted, all because Rick didn't want to show up. It was manipulative but effective. Rick felt the guilt gnawing at him. Angelica added her own point, reminding him that even if Brewston killed him, the orc could just revive him. But Rick snapped that death is still death, and no one but him knew how traumatic it was. Angelica finally snapped. She admitted she once looked up to him as her mentor, but now she wondered if she'd misjudged him completely. She stormed away, leaving Rick sulking even deeper. As he sat wallowing, Ms., who was also waiting for him to come out, reveals the truth about Brewston's dream and why he had a complete 2-year training routine even before Rick had arrived to train with them. Orcs thrived on brawling, but Brewston was so absurdly strong that no one could last against him. His dream wasn't wealth or glory, it was simply to find someone who could stand toe-to-toe with him. That was why he had trained Rick so hard. Ms. pointed out that Rick could still withdraw if he wanted, but urged him to think about things from Brewston's perspective. Even Alice chimed in with her childlike logic. Brewston just wanted to play, so it would be mean not to play with him. Rick's mind flashes back 2 years. He remembers stepping into the Orichalcum Fist for the first time, nervous and uncertain, when Rionette introduced him to their leader. Brewston had shaken his hand, looked him over, and immediately saw the truth. Rick had zero talent. When he asked if Rick even realized it, Rick thought he was being told to quit, but instead Brewston had grinned and said talent wasn't everything. If Rick worked harder than anyone else, if he trained like his life depended on it, he could still grow. Then he asked if Rick was ready for the hardest training of his life. Back in the present, Angelica, still frustrated, wondered aloud if Rick's training with Brewston had really been that harsh. Ms. confirmed it had been brutal, bordering on inhuman, and honestly a miracle Rick hadn't lost his mind. Angelica realized then that, for a middle-aged man with no skill to his name, Rick must have suffered far more than he ever let on. Alice pointed out that Rick did have a skill, though Ms. added that it was so hard on his body that Brewston had forbidden him from using it. Later that night, Rick sought out Reinette, asking in a low voice if she thought he was pathetic. She didn't sugarcoat things, saying she didn't think that at all, but she would like him better if he still fought Brewston despite the fear. The next morning, the arena roared with anticipation. Snape wrung his hands nervously, worrying what would happen if Rick bailed at the last second. The announcer hyped up the event, explaining that the winner would not only be crowned champion, but also walk away with a staggering $300 million cash prize and 2 tickets to the hot springs, which somehow got the crowd even louder. Backstage, Rick was trembling so hard it looked like his knees were about to give out as Reinette and Angelica approached, giving him one last push of motivation. Reinette whispers something into his ears before he steps out into the arena. Finally, Rick and Brewston stepped into the arena. Rick forced out a declaration that he would fight with everything he had. The match began, and to everyone's shock, Rick blitzed forward at incredible speed, clashing with Brewston in a storm of blows so fast the human eye couldn't keep up. In the blink of an eye, they had exchanged 100 strikes, and Rick had even landed his slicing technique, managing to injure the orc. Snape thought he'd used magic, but Reinette clarified it was pure hand-to-hand combat, just bodies enhanced and thrown into a blur of fists. Rick pressed the attack, but Brewston countered hard. Still, Rick managed another slash, his fighting spirit burning so brightly that even Angelica couldn't hide her excitement. She turned to Reinette, demanding to know what she'd said to fire him up like this. Reinette, calm as ever, revealed her secret. She promised to join him at the hot springs if he won. Angelica's face went red instantly. When Reinette added, very matter-of-factly, that yes, she did mean it in that way, Angelica nearly combusted on the spot and sputtered that they should probably focus on the match. The battle only got fiercer. Brewston launched a storm of blows, his massive body moving faster than seemed possible. Rick dodged desperately until the orc suddenly appeared right beside him with a crushing strike ready. At the last second, Rick conjured an air cushion spell, casually skipping the chanting, and saved himself. The crowd gasped, amazed at his control. Rick revealed that Mizette and Alice had taught him, and he quickly countered with an air shot, which Brewston managed to block. Angelica, still stunned, realized this wasn't a normal fight anymore. It was a clash on the level of true S rankers. Brewston acknowledged Rick's growth, genuinely glad that his grueling training had paid off. Rick knew the orc never lied, so he took the compliment to heart, though he wasn't satisfied. He wanted Brewston to stop holding back, to treat him as an equal. He confessed that Ms. had told him the truth about Brewston's dream, and he wanted to give him that fight he'd been waiting for. Brewston's eyes softened. It had been 2 years since they first met. Rick was no longer the talentless old man who stumbled into their guild. He was now a full-fledged warrior. With that, Brewston decided it was time. As fists tightened and the air trembled with anticipation, he began to reveal the past, and the true reason the Orichalcum fist had been born. Brewston takes Rick back 46 years, to when he was just a small orc child, though even then he was already different. It wasn't just his unusual appearance, it was his mind. While other orcs fought to communicate, he preferred reading the books humans left behind. He even learned their language and culture, and one day decided to give himself a name, Brewston, because if humans had individuality, then he would too. But this gift of intelligence came at a price. Orcs understood one another through fighting, through blows and bruises, yet Brewston was far too strong. No one could last long enough to talk with him, so instead he tried improving their lives, teaching them fire, building homes, introducing new ways to communicate. His reward? They started worshiping him like a god. Suddenly, his parents, his siblings, everyone stopped approaching him. He was untouchable, unapproachable, and ultimately alone. That loneliness only deepened the night he returned to camp after a storm to find all his kin dead. He didn't even feel sadness, just an empty realization of how completely alone he truly was. One night, while reading by the fire, his solitude was broken by a human sword coming straight at his head. He dodged with ease, and the attacker froze at the sight of an orc calmly reading a book. Even more shocking was the wyvern corpse lying nearby, which Brewston had casually slain. When the human heard him speak, he apologized for the attack. Brewston brushed it off. He was used to being attacked on sight. The man introduced himself as Reinhard, and after hearing Brewston's story, he said it was tragic that someone like him might never find an equal to fight. But maybe, Reinhard suggested, Brewston could chase the dream that he himself could not achieve. When Brewston asked what that dream was, Reinhard revealed something insane. He had once fought alongside Yamato the hero, 200 years ago. Not only that, he was the one who wrote the legendary tale about Yamato and insisted that it wasn't fiction, but his real experiences. Brewston couldn't believe it. Yet when Reinhard mentioned the dream of one day defeating the Kaiser Alsapiet, Brewston knew exactly what he meant. Reinhard believed that chasing this dream would also lead Brewston to people strong enough to stand beside him. So the two banded together, forming the Orichalcum Fist, and Brewston finally met comrades of staggering strength. But even then he realized their abilities were different from his own. They were powerful, but no one could give him that raw, bare-fisted brawl his orc blood craved. So he designed the ultimate training plan in hopes of creating such a rival. Though even Mizette thought it was so brutal no one could ever survive it. Eventually he gave up on that dream, until Rick came along. Life, he mused, really is full of surprises. Back in the present, Brewston shrugs off his own story, calling it boring, and asks that they continue their fight. Rick, though, can't brush it off so easily. For 2 years, Brewston had supervised his training, pouring his time and energy into shaping him. This fight, Rick realizes, is his chance to repay that devotion. He raises his hand and gives the orc gesture of resolve, a quarter thumbs up, signaling his intent to fight with nothing but his fists. The sight moves Brewston, and then they collide. The fight transforms into a pure slugfest, both of them throwing everything into each blow. Rick finally throws away his fear of dying, embracing this as the ultimate test and his chance to give his teacher the battle he's always dreamed of. Their fists crash, their bodies strain, and soon the arena barrier itself begins to break apart. Miz notices the danger, and with Alice's help, unleashes divine magic to send the spectators away. A good move too, because the instant the barrier shatters, the fight grows even more destructive. Snape stares in disbelief as Rick shatters Brewston's necklace mid-brawl. Angelica notices Rick landing more hits, but Snape points out the obvious. Brewston's punches are heavier, each one rattling the earth. Rick is battered, blown across the arena, but he refuses to give in. His body is broken, his strength spent, but his will remains. Even when he's reduced to barely moving a finger, he refuses to yield. And that's when it happens. His inborn skill, reckless soul, bursts to life. Brewston stares in surprise, while Ms. Alice and Rionette grin knowingly. They had been secretly helping Rick prepare for this very moment, training him to harness the terrifying ability. Snape asks what conditions triggered it, and Rionette explains, it's not magic or physical might, but pure willpower. Rick must be ready to push himself beyond every limit to face someone stronger than himself. And right now, that someone is standing right in front of him. Rick charges, fists blazing, and for the first time in decades, Brewston feels something click inside. He realizes he's spent his life chasing the idea of an equal, blind to the fact that he's never truly been alone. He's had comrades, friends, people who cared enough to stand by him and even train Rick in secret, all for his sake. The loneliness he carried from childhood shatters in that instant. With a smile, he meets Rick head-on. The two clash again, fists exploding against fists, shaking the arena with every strike. Finally, both pour their entire souls into one last exchange. A blinding flash swallows everything, and when the dust clears, both are still standing. Rick, exhausted and awed, admits to himself that Brewston is far too strong, before collapsing. But before Brewston falls too, he thanks Rick, his voice warm with gratitude, declaring that victory belongs to him. When Rick wakes, 3 days have passed. Rionette is at his side, and Ms. cheerfully reminds him that the last time he used Reckless Soul, he slept an entire week. Rick notices the belt on his waist and wonders if he somehow won, but Brewston clarifies, while Rick won the war. Technically, he himself won the match. It doesn't matter though. In his eyes, Rick proved himself strong, and more importantly, helped him fulfill his dream. With that, they secure the second jewel and replace it with a replica, Alice adding extra magic just to hide the swap. Talk of Reinhard lingers in Rick's mind, especially how a man from 2 centuries ago is still alive. Brewston explains that Reinhard's inborn skill grants him extended life, though even he hasn't seen him in years. As for where Reinhard is now, well, apparently he's on the run from his book editor. Some fights, it seems, are more terrifying than orc fists. Meanwhile, Snape informs Kelvin that since both Rick and Brewston declined the championship, Kelvin remains the champion by default. Kelvin refuses, insisting he doesn't deserve the belt. Gold and Militia shed tears as Brewston prepares to leave, but Gold swears he'll become a real fighter before they meet again. Rick and his party return with souvenirs for their neighbors, and Brewston watches them with quiet happiness. For the first time, he isn't alone. Angelica parts ways for now, but not before boldly asking Brewston to train her too. Rick thinks she's completely insane, but she vows to catch up and even surpass him. He accepts the challenge with a grin. As for Rick's own training, he declares he's running the 800 kilometers back to the castle. Angelica thinks he's lost his mind, pointing out that a carriage would take months. But Miz has other plans. He buffs the horse until it looks like it belongs in a bodybuilding competition. Before they go, Rionette teases Rick about the hot spring trip she promised. He turns bright red, torn between flustered excitement and the fact that technically he didn't win. Miz, ever the trickster, proposes a solution, a race back to the castle. If Rick wins, he gets the hot spring date. If he loses, his training multiplies by 100. No pressure. Alice kicks things off. Miz and Brewston sprint ahead, and Rick is left despairing. Still, he steels himself and charges after them, shouting to Rionette that he'll win. As the group races toward the horizon, Rick reflects. He finally achieved his dream of becoming an adventurer, but dreams never end, they only lead to the next one. And his journey, fists and all, is only just beginning.